What if everything you thought you knew about Persian history was upside down? What if I told you that the Persian Empire, one of the greatest in human history, didn't actually change the people who lived under its banners? That beneath the ruins of Persepolis, behind the language of poets and the fire of revolutions, there's a silent lineage untouched, unshaken, almost unchanged for over 9,000 years. That's not a metaphor. It's not a legend. It's a genetic fact. Because deep inside the DNA of modern Iranians, Kurds, Laz, Azeris, Persians, scientists are finding something no one expected. Overwhelming continuity with Neolithic farmers who lived in the Zagros Mountains around 7000 BCE. That's older than Babylon, older than the pharaohs. These weren't warriors or kings. They were goat herders, seed planters, the first to bury their dead in sacred ground. And somehow, their blood is still here. It survived the Aryan migrations, the Arab conquest, the Turkic dynasties, the Mongol fires, all the chapters where history says Persia was broken and rebuilt, again and again. But the genome? The genome didn't flinch. Modern Persians today share mitochondrial and autosomal markers with prehistoric skeletons found across ancient Iran. Clear proof of a continuous thread from the early Holocene to today. And these markers don't come from Rome, or Mecca, or Samarkand. They come from inside. So the contradiction is brutal. A land shaped by conquest, but a people untouched by conquerors. A history of change, hiding a bloodline of permanence. It begs the question, if Persian DNA didn't come from the invaders, where did it come from? And the answer lies not in the royal palaces or the sacred texts, but in the land itself. Because what protected that ancient genome wasn't an army. It was the mountains. And not just any mountains, Zagros in the west, Elburz in the north, towering walls of time, carved by tectonic fury and silence. For thousands of years, they weren't just a backdrop to Persian history. They were the reason that history stayed hidden in the blood. These ranges didn't simply protect. They were divided. They were isolated. They turned villages into islands, and DNA into time capsules. As early as 8200 BCE, Neolithic communities, like Ganj Dareh, took root in the Zagros valleys. They raised goats, shaped pottery, and unknowingly locked their genetic code into stone. Their mitochondrial markers, discovered in skeletal remains, match those found in modern La and Persian populations today. Thousands of years undisturbed. And here's the twist. While the rest of Eurasia mixed, migrated, and remade itself, these mountains held Persia still. Traders passed through: Greeks, Scythians, Bactrians, Arabs. Empires marched across the plateau. But the genes? They didn't leave. A 2025 archaeogenetics study sequenced 50 ancient Iranian genomes from 4700 BCE to 1300 CE. The finding: an almost flat genetic line. No major shifts. No dramatic influx. Just the slow heartbeat of continuity. Isolation became a design. The desert basins of Dasht-e-Kavr acted like natural moats. The salt winds, the dry heat, deadly for armies, perfect for preservation. Even language fractured under this pressure. A patchwork of dialects formed: Jalaki, Mazandarani, Southern Kurdish, all echoing the deep divides in the genome. Not one Iran, many Irans, each shaped by its own hidden geography. And that isolation had a cost. Endogamy grew. Communities married within, and within again. Consanguinity rates soared, as high as 40% in some regions. But with it came something else: purity. Not ideological, but biological. The echoes of ancient mothers preserved in mitochondrial strands, still speaking the language of Ganj Dareh, even if no one understands it anymore. The land shaped the people. It shaped who they trusted, who they married, even how they prayed. But geography is not a wall forever, because around 2000 BCE, a sound broke the silence. Hooves, wheels, and fire. Someone was coming, and they didn't come to stay. They came to rewrite. They came from the north, from windswept steppes stretching across what is now southern Russia and western Kazakhstan. Carved by cold, born to ride, they brought something Iran had never seen before: warfare as momentum, and ideology as inheritance. We call them the Indo-Iranians. They descended from the Sintashta and Andronovo cultures, inheritors of the Yamnaya expansion, the Great Bronze Age dispersal that reshaped half of Eurasia. Their arrival in Iran wasn't sudden. It was a pulse, slow, rhythmic, and disruptive. By 1800 BCE, they were entering the Iranian plateau through northeastern corridors, crossing into regions like Khorasan and Gorgan, then pushing west toward the Zagros. Archaeologists now trace their movement not just through pottery, but through the telltale appearance of the spoked-wheel chariot, an engineering marvel that allowed their warriors to strike and vanish like storms. But what truly marked them was language. These invaders didn't just bring weapons. They carried concepts, rituals, cosmic dualism, sacred fire. Their tongue would evolve into Avestan, the oldest preserved Iranian language, and perhaps the very language of Zarathustra himself. It's in these early centuries, roughly 1500 to 1200 BCE, that Zoroastrian thought may have first taken form, rooted in a worldview born on horseback, shaped by fire, and obsessed with order against chaos. Yet when we cut through myth and dig into the bones, a strange truth emerges. The DNA tells a different story. Despite their cultural dominance, the genetic impact of these Indo-Iranian steppe tribes was modest. The Y-DNA haplogroup R1a, Z93 appears in only 10 to 20% of modern Iranian males. The maternal line, mtDNA, remained overwhelmingly local. Ancient remains from the late Bronze Age in Iran show continuity with Neolithic genomes, stretching back over 5,000 years. The original farmers never truly disappeared. So who truly shaped Persian identity? The invaders, or the ones who survived the invasion? This is the contradiction at the core of Iranian history. An empire shaped by voices not its own, but bloodlines that refused to be overwritten. The Aryans brought gods and grammar, but the genome stayed grounded. And yet, their subtle imprint set the stage. Because after the Aryans came something louder, something that didn't whisper beliefs. It shouted new laws, in a language no one could ignore. But they were polite compared to what came next. Because not all arrivals come bearing culture. Some come bearing conquest. And some come with scripture. 651 C. The armies of Caliph Umar crossed the Zagros like a shadow stretching from the west. Fire temples crumbled. Zoroastrian priests fled. The last Sasanian emperor, Yazdijerd III, was dead. His crown lost, his lineage scattered. And in his place the new empire rose. Not with statues or poetry, but with a single book, the Quran. It swept across Persia like wildfire, rewriting laws, silencing ancient chants, and carving the Arabic script into the skin of Persian identity. Within decades, cities that once praised Ahura Mazda now whispered verses of Tawhid. The Avestan tongue fell silent, replaced by Arabic in courts, in commerce, in faith. But beneath that silence, something unexpected. The blood didn't change. Despite one of the most complete cultural conversions in history, Iranian DNA shows minimal genetic impact from Arab conquerors. In a 2019 PLOS genetic study, autosomal analysis revealed that most Iranian populations remain genetically indistinguishable from their pre-Islamic ancestors. Even Y-DNA haplogroup J1, common in Arab males, is rare in northern and central Iran, appearing significantly only in Kazakhstan near the Mesopotamian border. This wasn't mass migration. It wasn't a demographic takeover. It was an ideology on the march. And yet, even that ideology, eventually, bent to the land it entered. By the 9th century, Persian poets were writing in Arabic, but reshaping it. By the 10th, the Shahnameh was born. 11th century verses so powerful they resurrected a Persian cultural identity within an Islamic frame. Persia absorbed Islam, but Islam in Persia began to sound Persian. Still, the genome held its silence. The ancient mitochondrial haplogroups, HU7TJ, passed through the daughters of Ganj Dareh and the wives of Yazd, untouched by the conquests of the caliphate. Because this invasion, as loud as it seemed, did not settle in the bone. It settled in the mind. But the next ones, they weren't satisfied with just their minds or prayer. They brought bloodlines, languages, and steppe fire. They didn't come to conquer. They came to belong. But belonging comes in many forms. In the 11th century CE, the land of Persia, heard a new tongue. It came not from Arabia, but from the east, carried by tribes who rode fast, lived hard, and called themselves Oghuz, the Seljuks. They were Turkic horsemen, born of the Central Asian steppes, forged in the chaos left by collapsing Khazar and Samanid realms. They didn't ride in with prophecy or sacred texts. They came with warcraft and ambition. By 1037 CE, they had taken Nishapur. By 1055, Baghdad. And soon, all of Iran bowed beneath their banners. But what happened next defies the script of conquest. Because the Seljuks didn't try to erase Persia. They embraced it. Within decades, Turkic rulers were wearing Persian robes, writing Persian poetry, commissioning Persian architecture. They adopted the diwan, the courtly etiquette, the literature, right down to the verse structures of Ferdowsi. This was no accident. It was assimilation in reverse. Persia conquered its conquerors. But here's the real twist. They left barely a trace in the genome. Despite centuries of rule, from the Seljuks to the Safavids to the Qajars, the genetic signal of Turkic ancestry in most Persian populations is surprisingly faint. Y-DNA haplogroups C, N, and Q, which dominate in Central Asia, remain below 10% across the Iranian plateau. Even among the Turkic-speaking Azeris of Iran, genome-wide studies show they cluster more closely with Persians and Kurds than with Uzbeks or Kazakhs. How is that possible? Because the language changed, but the blood stayed local. This is the paradox of the Persian-Turkic dynamic. The Qajars ruled Tehran, yet their sons married Persian daughters. The Safavids prayed in Persian mosques, and the Turkic elite became Persian in everything but name. So much so that even in Turkish-speaking cities, the genes whisper Achaemenid, not Altai. This is the strange power of Persian identity. It absorbs. It transforms. It doesn't resist foreign rule, it seduces it. But not all conquerors are so easily swayed, because the next wave didn't come to borrow culture. They came to burn it. And in 1219 CE, they did. Genghis Khan's armies tore into Persia with a fury not even the land had known before. The Khwarezmian Empire, once a proud successor to the Seljuks, was shattered. Nishapur, Merv, Tus, Ray, Herat, wiped clean. Not conquered. Erased. In Merv, the death toll reached an estimated 700,000. In Nishapur, it was so personal. Legend says Genghis ordered every soul killed to avenge his son-in-law. Women, children, the elderly, buried beneath the rubble of a single command. And yet, despite this horror, the Mongols vanished from the blood. This is the contradiction that baffles modern geneticists. East Asian Y-DNA haplogroups, especially haplogroup C2, often linked to Genghis Khan's lineage, are almost absent in Iran today. In most Iranian populations, including those in the regions hardest hit, Khorasan, Golestan, northern Iran, C2 levels remain well below 5%. Autosomal studies confirm it. A 2021 genome-wide survey across Iranian ethnic groups found that, while faint East Asian traces exist, they're statistically insignificant. No genetic flood. No hybrid population. Just silence. And that silence tells us everything. Because the Mongols didn't come to settle. They came to punish. Their vision of empire was control, not coexistence. The Mongol Ilkhanate, formed in 1256 under Hulagu, did adopt Persian administration, language, and architecture. But genetically, they remained separate. There were no mixed villages. No waves of Mongol farmers marrying locals. Just ruins. It's the greatest irony in Iranian history. The invasion that shattered cities, buried cultures, and left scars in every manuscript barely touched the genome. The only trace of them now lives in poetry, in the dirges of Sadi, in the ruined minarets of Tus, in the shadows of Kazvin's silent madrasas. The blood forgot them. But Persia's coasts hold a different kind of memory, because long before ships brought goods across the Indian Ocean, they carried something else, voices in another language, songs in another rhythm, and genes that still whisper across southern Iran. And they did not come with armies. They came enslaved. For nearly 1,000 years, the winds of the Indian Ocean didn't just carry silk and spices. They carried people. From the 9th to the 19th century, slave ships crossed the sea from East Africa, Zanzibar, Mozambique, the Swahili coast, bound for the ports of southern Iran. Hormuz, Bandar Abbas, Bushehr, Khorramshahr. Names we now hear in news bulletins were once gates of sorrow. They brought women, men, and children, sold, bartered, branded, pulled from their homes into the Persian Gulf world, not as merchants, but as property. And yet, those voices did not vanish, because even in silence, blood speaks. Modern genetic analysis, especially mtDNA studies, reveals L haplogroups, common in sub-Saharan Africa, still present in Afro-Iranian communities from Kazakhstan to Hormuzgan. These lineages don't appear by accident. They're proof of survival, of mothers whose names were never written down, but whose mitochondria still hum through the veins of southern Iran. And that survival became culture. Listen closely in Bandar Ekong or Keshem Island, and you'll hear music that doesn't sound Persian. Drums from East Africa, rhythms tied to ritual, songs that merge Islamic prayers with ancestral chants passed through slavery's cage. In places like Sistan and southern Fars, you'll find weddings where czar possession ceremonies, blending African spirit rituals and Shurey invocations, still unfold beneath the radar of official history. And here's the tension. In a country that prides itself on ancient empires and Aryan origins, Afro-Iranians walk a strange line. Persian by birth, African by legacy, often invisible in textbooks, but unmistakable in the genome. It's a lineage of pain and resilience, and it's still reshaping the story of who Persians really are. Because the Persian identity isn't just Aryan, or Zoroastrian, or Islamic. It's coastal. It's blended. It's been carried on backbeats and whispered through market alleys and woven into the calices of pearl divers who never knew their ancestors were stolen. But there's another fracture in the Persian genome, and it wasn't caused by invaders or by chains. It came from within, hidden marriages, silent rules, and blood too tightly bound. But even in that tightness, there's something else, something more complicated. Iran is not one people. It never was. From the shores of the Caspian to the cliffs of Kurdistan, from the deserts of Yaz to the green valleys of Jilin, there's another map. Not of cities or borders, but of blood. Geneticists call it structure, clusters, and in Iran they're everywhere. Principal component analysis and admixture models reveal a unique genetic mosaic across the Iranian plateau. There isn't a single Persian genome, but many. Laz, Mazandaranis, Gilaks, Baloch, Kurds, Azeris, Arabs, all speaking different tongues, praying in different ways. But at the molecular level, they share something ancient. Most belong to what scientists now call the Central Iranian cluster, a dense genetic core that reaches from Isfahan to Kermanshah, deep, consistent, and shockingly unified. Even more surprising, Azeris, who speak a Turkic language, show strong genomic overlap with Persian-speaking populations. Genome-wide data from a 2020 study found Iranian Azeris closer to Central Iranians than to any Turkic group in Central Asia. It's a silent story of language without blood, culture without conquest, a nation that, over thousands of years, absorbed tongues without changing its face. This is why Iran defies every simple label. You can't point to one race, one ancestry, one look. Because this land never picked a side. It's a web, woven by mountains, trade, migration, and silence. Even Kazakhstan's Arabs, speaking a dialect tied to Mesopotamia, carry DNA that echoes the ancient Elamites and Proto-Iranians before them. Even the Kurds of western Iran, long seen as a distinct ethnic group, carry haplogroups rooted in the same Neolithic ancestry as Central Persians. But even inside this unity lies a dangerous concentration. Because when people marry only their own, again and again, whether by culture, faith, or isolation, something happens. The gene pool narrows, the risk rises, and hidden inside Persian DNA is a quiet inheritance, one the ancient empires never saw coming. A burden passed down not through war, but through love. Because sometimes love doesn't expand a lineage. It tightens it. It carries memory. And it leads to one final twist. A piece of the Persian genome that predates empires, that outlived conquest. But before we reach that ancient whisper, we have to pass through something far more modern, far more uncomfortable. Because while the Persian genome endured conquests, migrations, and religious upheaval, one of its deepest fractures was self-inflicted. In the quiet backroads of Yazd, in the narrow alleys of Bushehr, in remote corners of Lorestan and Sistan, generations have practiced a form of protection, not with swords or walls, but with marriage. Marriage to their own cousins, sometimes even uncles and nieces. In certain rural provinces, consanguinity rates range from 25% to 40%, among the highest in the world. And this isn't recent. Persian court records from the Qajar period, 1789 to 1925, already show marriage alliances repeated within lineages for land, honor, and blood purity. But in preserving bloodlines, they also preserve mutations. Genomic studies published in 2020 across Iranian medical institutions found alarmingly high homozygosity, especially in regions like Khuzestan and Hormozgan. Entire towns, genetically bottlenecked. And with that came genetic disorders, beta thalassemia, Tay-Sachs, cystic fibrosis. Diseases that once appeared only in rare case studies are now mapped across entire ethnic lines. A landmark study by the Iranian Blood Transfusion Organization in 2018 showed that over 2 million Iranians are carriers of thalassemia mutations, with a concentration along the Caspian coast and the southern provinces, a result not of invasion, but of inheritance. Still, these aren't just numbers. They're names. Families who've buried more than one child. Couples who fear falling in love with someone they share a surname with. Young people caught between tradition and biology, pride and prevention. And this is where science meets taboo. Doctors now walk a razor's edge, mapping entire pedigrees in villages, warning communities that the blood they protect may also betray. Genetics is no longer just about ancestry. It's about survival. But here's what makes Iran unique. Even within these closed gene pools, researchers have found ancient mitochondrial lineages, haplogroups like U7 and HV2, that link modern Iranians to Neolithic Zagros farmers from over 9,000 years ago. The same maternal line, unbroken, undiluted, a memory so deep, it survived plagues, kings, and close kin. But that maternal whisper may go even further, because hidden inside it is a genetic ghost, a lineage no one expected, from a woman buried in the Zagros. Before Iran was Iran, her bones were found in Ganj Dareh, a tiny Neolithic village cradled in the Zagros Mountains, dated to around 10,000 years ago. She had no palace, no crown, no written name, just fragments of a skull, wrapped in soil and mystery. When geneticists sequenced her DNA in 2016, what they found cracked open everything. She carried no Neanderthal traces. None. This was the first known evidence of Basal Eurasian ancestry, a lineage older than the mixing of modern humans with Neanderthals, older than the Indo-Europeans, older than writing, older than gods. She belonged to a people that stayed in the warm refuge of West Asia, while the rest of humanity wandered into the Ice Age wilds of Europe and Asia. And in her, scientists found a kind of genetic purity, a ghost line, untouched by what came after. But here's the twist. Modern Persians still carry her signal. Studies show the Iranian plateau harbors some of the highest levels of Basal Eurasian ancestry in the world. In some regions, this component makes up more than 50% of genome, linking today's Iranians not to the Arabs, not to the Turks, not even to the Indo-Aryans, but to Paleolithic West Asians. It means something profound, that deep inside the Persian genome is a memory older than the empire, older than conquest, a signal not of kings, but of survivors. Principal component analysis doesn't place Persians near their linguistic cousins, the Indo-Aryans of India, nor with the Arabs of the South. Instead, astonishingly, they plot closer to modern Caucasus populations, and sometimes even Sardinians, isolated mountain and island communities that, like Persians, were shaped not by who arrived, but by who stayed. This isn't nationalism. This isn't a myth. This is molecular time travel. Because Persian DNA doesn't just tell the story of Iran. It tells the story of what came before language, before history, before division. So the question echoes through ruins, through wars, through every empire that tried to rewrite this land. Whose history does Persian DNA truly tell? It tells us of whispers from the Paleolithic, rhythms from Zanzibar, horsemen from the steppe, traders from Elam, priests from Yazd, nomads from Turkmen sands. Persian DNA doesn't echo one history, it composes a symphony, but one that refuses to resolve into a single chord, because every answer brings a deeper question. Why do the Zoroastrians of Yazd carry such undiluted ancestry, genetic signatures that date back over 2 millennia, nearly untouched by the Islamic conquests, by Mongol fire, or even modern migration? A 2017 genome-wide study published in Nature Communications revealed that Iranian Zoroastrians possess one of the highest levels of endogamy in the world, trapped in time, genetically preserved like amber in stone. And what about the invisible river that flows from Iran to the Indian subcontinent? Ancient DNA from the Harappan site of Rakhigarhi shows Iranian-related ancestry, pre-Indo-Aryan, pre-Dravidian, from a time when Elamites traded with Meluhha, and the Achaemenid Empire stretched from Persepolis to the banks of the Indus. Was the Iranian plateau not just a passage, but a parent? Even the Levant and the Caucasus speak back. Genomic comparisons between Iranian Kurds and Armenian Highlanders reveal shared ancestry clusters, split by empires, united by blood. But the more we map these genes, the more the lines blur. Because DNA doesn't recognize flags or religions. It carries migrations, mutations, and memories, stitched into the double helix by time and selection. And then comes the hardest question. Does our identity shape our genome? The foods we eat, the cousins we marry, the exiles we survive, the borders we cross. Or does the genome shape identity? Quietly, slowly, generations deep, until the face in the mirror feels ancient, even when the story is forgotten. We now have the tools: genome sequencing, radiocarbon dating, PCA graphs, admixture algorithms. And yet, some answers retreat the closer we chase them. The Persian genome still holds unsolved variables, founder effects that can't be traced, haplogroups with no modern equivalents, ancient maternal lines that show up in the most unexpected places, from the Zagros to Zanzibar. This isn't just history, it's prophecy, etched in flesh. And until the last base pair is decoded, the story isn't over. Because in the blood, Persia still waits to be fully understood.